Proportional Response, Book 1, Chapter 8, Part 4, Pause for Breath. Enable stood, still panting, behind the barricaded door to his embassy. One of his staff brought him a glass of water, then handed more water out to the human soldiers. He took note of her face. If she is bucking for a promotion, she just got it. Everyone else is standing around gaping. She has the presence of mind to take care of me and our guests. Need to learn her name. He wiped his mouth with the towel one of the humans had handed him, and something on it caught his eye. The number 42 had been stenciled into the towel in human numerals. Yep, too much time with the humans. I can even read their numbers without the translator. But what does that number mean? He turned to ask the one who had handed him the towel. He found the man still standing at door, looking at the display, a look of anger and frustration on his face. The man suddenly turned to the other humans, took a step forward, and opened his mouth to speak. The human who seemed to be in charge spoke first, without even looking up from his weapon.
Permission denied, Corporal, and don't argue. We have our orders, and you know it. Keep your comm gear on. They will let us know if we are needed. For now, sit your butt down in one of those chairs, make sure your gear is in order, and get a little food in you. If they need us for a second round, we are going to need our strength.
The man by the door hesitated and looked about to argue, then the one in charge locked eyes with him.
Are you going to make me repeat myself?
The younger man looked a little abashed.
No, sir. What, sir? Did you just call me sir, boy? Do you see officer stripes on this uniform? I work for a living, boy.
The man straightened a little at the tone.
Sorry, Sergeant. I'll get to my gear.
The sergeant nodded, stood, took a last look at his blade, and slammed it home in its scabbard. Enable jumped a little at the movement. Then the sergeant's entire demeanor changed to something that almost seemed to show deference, and he had to force his feet to stay still as the man turned to walk over to him.
We will stay here with you until the crisis is past, sir. It is likely that we will get a few more in here to reinforce this position once the fighting tapers off. To tell the truth, we didn't expect the geckos to commit so many men to this. I'm sorry you are only getting the three of us, but they said something about the Jeks considering you a target of opportunity, rather than a primary target.
Enable nodded. It took effort to keep his voice steady, and he felt a little pride when he managed it.
Thank you, Sergeant. Based on what I just saw, I think that your men, along with my own guards, should be more than adequate for the job. Now, if you'll excuse me, I believe all of this excitement has gotten the better of me, and I would like some time to go to pieces. As you humans so colloquially put it, in private.
He tried to hand the towel back to the human who had given it to him, but the man smiled and waved him away.
I have more, sir. You keep it.
The sergeant took a look at the towel and seemed to find something offensive about it, though he couldn't figure out what. The older man glared at his subordinate, then turned and walked away while shaking his head. He considered asking, but his knees tried to give out from under him. He turned and had to put all of his concentration into walking at a steady pace until he made it to his quarters. Once there, he turned on a noise canceller, silently thanking the Queen for allowing him to buy a human 3D printer, threw himself on his bed, and went to pieces. Enable did not know how long he'd lain on his bed weeping, screaming, gnashing his teeth, and running in place to try and get himself rational. When he finally spent the fear-built energy, he wanted nothing more than to close his eyes and sleep, but he had duty to perform. He opened his laptop, the special one, and typed simply, "I am here." The screen went blank immediately, and words appeared. "You had us worried, boy. Zoltan News is reporting a massacre at the League complex. Some story about an uprising of the local sultan, who came in and started slaughtering everyone, especially ambassadors." Enable blinked at the screen. He felt a thrill at his queen feeling worry for him, and chagrin for not thinking to contact her sooner. "My apologies, Your Majesty. I needed a moment to collect myself after, watching the humans and Zoltans, kill each other. You witnessed some of the fighting? How are the humans doing?" "I think massacre is a good word for it, but it is the Ultans dying in droves. I saw one human dead, watched them, keep yourself together, boy." If you are having this much trouble, then I guess the coming Prime Minister role is not something you seek." Anibal nearly fainted, and it took him a little while to reply. His hands shook while he typed, "I would be honored, of course, and I live to serve. I will, of course, do my best to fulfill whatever task Her Majesty asks of—" "Stow it, Anibal." "Laugh. Sorry, I shouldn't do that to you when I can't see your face. Not nearly as much fun. Now, this is a private conversation. You can drop the damn decorum. I get plenty of that day in and day out as it is. Do you have yourself together enough to give me a full account? I want to know exactly what happened in that chamber and everything you saw on your way back to the embassy. Leave nothing out. When you are done, I am going to give your account to one of my scribes and have them use that to make your formal report to me so that you can get some rest." "Thank you. I believe I can use the rest. I can give my report." When the session opened, Galen Bascor, the Themican ambassador, smoothed the feathers on his head and approached the human embassy. The hours since everyone left the council chamber had been hard. The run through the fighting had been bad enough. Keeping his own soldiers inside his compound had been painful. They'd seen Zoltan blood and were eager to go shed some themselves. He'd used every trick he knew to keep them in line, but the head of his human guards had finally put an end to the argument by declaring he had enough men to keep the embassy secure, and then suggesting a compromise. Galen's men would draw straws, and half of them would go help finish the fighting. He allowed himself a heavy sigh. Not all of those men came back. He'd kept a feather from each to have it preserved and sent to their families as befit their hero's death. The feathers on his crown stood on end as he heard heavy human boots marching up behind him. His human guard held out an arm and gently moved him to the wall of the corridor so that 4 humans, moving at a trot and carrying another Zoltan body, could pass by. They are my allies and kept me safe, yet. Primal instincts still have their say. He resisted an urge to try to reach high ground as they moved past and laughed at himself internally. Our evolutionary path may have given up flight in favor of denser bones and muscles, and who knows what else, but our hindbrains remember the heights. He pondered while they waited, history lessons passing before his eyes. His people had descended from predatory birds. This gave them forward-facing eyes, acute vision unmatched even by the humans, a love of bursts of speed, and an affinity for high places. We still prefer to ambush from above when hunting or fighting. I wonder how the human evolution from chimps affected them. What was it I heard about them liking to throw things? The soldiers trotted into the human embassy door ahead of him. He then heard another sound that made him quicken his pace. The unmistakable sound of the Zoltan Council Guard marching. A noticeable contingent by what he could hear, and they were coming this way. The human turned to look at him. He didn't understand human facial expressions well. He was only just beginning to be able to tell them apart, but he thought this one looked worried. The man's worried tone did carry through the translator program, however.
"Ambassador, are you and your men willing to run for a moment?"
Galen responded with a nod, and immediately broke into a run. He ran flat out, cursing his lack of exercise for the second time in one day, and letting himself get soft. The humans seemed to be putting forth no effort at all, which deepened his annoyance. They turned the corner into the human embassy, and he nearly turned around to run out of it. His men's hands went to their weapons, and he could feel all of them poised for violence, their eyes all fixed on 3 Zoltans, 2 men and 1 woman, standing with their backs to them at the far end of the embassy's entry chamber. Henry stood with his back to them, staring intently at a display in the chamber's large table. He abruptly turned and straightened. A broad smile gleamed white teeth through his beard, and he put both his hands up in a placating gesture.
"Be at peace, my friends. There is no threat within these walls. The Zoltan you see here are citizens of the Human Confederation. You remember 2 Zoltan worlds elected to join our union not too long ago. These 3 are from there. One is a secretary, one a lawyer, and the young lady is an engineer. Please, they mean no harm."
The 3 Zoltan had turned when they were mentioned, and stood in postures of downright subservience. Henry glanced at them, then turned his head to look at them, and he made some sort of gesture with his hand. The three of them stood straighter and raised their chins, though their motions seemed hesitant to Galen. Henry nodded slightly to them, then turned back to him and shrugged.
We are still working on some things with them, but these three are good people, as are the handful of others I have working here now. If...
The sound of the guard approaching grew louder, and Henry cut off in mid-sentence. Galen felt the feathers on the back of his neck start to stand on end at Henry's abruptly blank expression, and turned to see a good number of Elton Council guards, all with pulse rifles in hand, marching towards him. He recognized Karkin Credal, the Master-at-Arms of Council Security, at their head. He looked briefly between Karkin and Henry, the instincts of a predator caught between two higher predators pushing him to flee. He settled for stepping quickly, but with dignity, off to the side and motioning for his entourage to do so as well. Karkin and his troops kept marching at a double-time walk, and showed no sign of slowing as they approached the door of the embassy. Galen kept glancing back and forth between the Zoltans and the humans, but noticed something strange. The human guards all stood with their eyes on Henry, showing no apparent concern over the armed and armored Zoltans marching towards them. When it became obvious that the advancing guard weren't going to stop, the Henry simply nodded his head. As soon as he did, every human moved, and moved fast. The few civilians in the room exited with speed, though they obviously remained calm. The uniformed men, however, they moved like a well-oiled machine. Before Galen could blink twice, they had formed an orderly double line, with a half-dozen men kneeling, and another half-dozen standing behind them. They didn't have their rifles pointed at the advancing Zoltans, but they had them ready. He couldn't help but admire the efficiency of the formation, nor the courage it took to hold it. Those men stood completely exposed, but that many rifles could put out an incredible amount of damage. Quickly, the sound of the marching Zoltans stuttered when the humans made their move. Then it slowed. Galen realized that he'd been routed to the same spot, just barely off to the side, for far too long, and moved with speed to make sure he was well out of the line of fire.